Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
So thank you for agreeing to talk with us today. And
Gladly.
we're at ASA here in Chicago, which is super fun. And so why don't you tell us a bit about yourself first?
So I am a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, a couple of hours south of here. And I've been doing research in male reproduction off and on in my career since 2003. And I got my PhD at UC Davis with Trish Berger, doing some epididymal research that she was so kind and generous to allow me to do. And I've been part of the ASA since 2011. And I'm now the trainee rep.
So as far as male contraception, as you know, we're focused primarily on male non-hormonal reversible contraception at MCI.
Parts.
I know. I'm already biased, so yes, but I agree. And how would you say in your time, like since you've been with the ASA and seeing the science sort of moving forward, how do you see the field right now for non-hormonal male contraception?
I think it's very promising. I think that there are leads in development in the pipeline. They're still down the road because the most well-developed compound is facing some toxicity, I believe. There's a lot of aspects to contraception, and there's a lot of different flavors to this conversation about contraception that are not well received all the time, or I feel like the conversation about contraceptive is full of taboos that are starting to be broken.
Yeah. That's
and
great.
I find that really promising, that the conversation for a male contraceptive is becoming more and more prominent in our society. And even the last 10 years, I've heard it more. I've heard it more from the NIH. And the history with the female contraceptive being developed mainly by private funders and women who were really pushing for their own rights. I've just, it's been a really fast progress if you really think about how we've come along. In 100 years, we've gotten from nothing and, women just being forced to bear children at the whims of nature to being able to control when and how often we get to have children and get to, get to have children rather than we have to have children. That's amazing. And so being able to offer that power to men and saying, this is for you. This is your ability to control this aspect of your life. I know you think that, like the dominant conversation is that you don't need to do it, that it's not on your shoulders is ridiculous. And I think that barrier begins to break, and that wall is starting to crack is just so phenomenal, and I'm so excited. And we are seeing support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're seeing support from initiatives from you guys. I love that. I love that there's so many different players in the field, and that is really what it's about. It's just getting people moving in the same direction.
Yeah. So I'm interested, so when you talk about it is a very multifaceted field, and the impact is multifaceted, and I feel like especially there's so much promise in the male contraceptive space by simple reason that there's nothing really available. You've got such a wide spectrum. It's condoms and permanent and nothing in between. And so I think to a couple of your points, one about the breaking those walls down. So the lack of methods sort of enables that mentality to continue with, there's nothing I can do about it. So this is women's issue, and I think that we're starting to hear that as well. So we've been, in addition to our focus on research, which is our primary, mechanism of support at MCI, we are also trying to really build a conversation and advocacy angle around these kinds of conversations. And
Yeah.
so it's as simple as just talking to people. So when we travel, we always try to take time to coordinate a focus group or some in-depth interviews with just general public folks.
Yeah.
So where do we work? So we're able to kind of plant ourselves in an environment where we can say, hey, we're here. If you want to talk about this, come. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But we've had some really cool conversations that way.
Yeah.
And to see the men in particular that are like adamant and like, I want to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
So it really does sort of invigorate you to want to advocate for them in the field. But back to your kind of multifaceted conversation, we're really also interested in looking at how we can innovate in this space. Not necessarily, the research is sort of, it handles that. It is the innovation.
Yeah.
But how can we innovate to make sure that we're moving things along as quickly as possible?
Yeah, the conversation.
Yeah, and also, preparing at the regulatory stages. Like, how can we work together to make sure that everyone working in the space has a clear understanding of the regulatory path? And how can we advocate together to bring in even additional funding resources? Because with the early stage, such a heavily weighed early stage product development pipeline, we really want to see how we can assist in that. And some of that might be bringing in people from seemingly tangential areas of practice. Which is great about being at ASA is because everybody's working in the same general field, but there's definitely shared learnings there and people have their areas of specialty. So what are your thoughts about how we could really innovate movement of these methods forward?
So I spend time thinking about what is going to be able to really go through that regulatory process and go through clinical trials and be successful. And it boils down to, can we see in a laboratory sample that we have an effective contraceptive? And so I don't think that it's going to be a viable option to target capacitation and acrosome reaction and that actual process of sperm egg binding, because we won't be able to tell at clinical trial, and that risk level is going to be really difficult for patients that are participating in clinical trials to accept. At least there are some people that would do it, I think, but I think it's more about, if we get a semen sample into a lab, can we see that it's effective? And therefore, I believe that target makes it a non-loose sperm, like no tails. We've affected morphology, we've affected presence of sperm, or we've affected motility, and therefore it's visible. That's the readout I think that is important to think about, because that's downstream. That's thinking a long term, like, okay, when we are picturing a male contraceptive, are we able to see patients that are going to accept it? And I worked on gamendazole, and the readout was, is testicular weight effective? And I knew it was effective. I knew a compound was effective when testicular weight was 50% of the controls. And that readout, I don't believe, would be acceptable for a human male, because that hits an emotional masculinity definition, and I don't think that that's going to be acceptable. But there's still application for this compound. There's still uses and information that we can gain from it. But definitely, that would be something that we could see. There's no sperm in the ejaculate. We have effects.
Yeah.
That's where I see male contraceptives going. So it's just being able to tell when you have an ejaculate, do we have an effect?
It's huge. That is such a great point, because even with female contraception, you have no way of knowing when there's no color
readout.
change, no readout. Yeah. So and to accelerate recruitment and the process through clinical trials, that's such a great point, to think ahead that way. So if you can convince people with data and visual visual confirmation that, look, there is a, with any clinical study, there's the risks and whatever, but we feel confident and we can give you this visual confirmation that is pretty darn low.
Yeah.
And so how do you feel like the existing assays out there to demonstrate
It has to be simple.
Yeah.
And it has to exist. I think.
So you feel like there's nothing that is quite there yet?
No, I think if we have, compound-wise,
right?
If we have something that can target their morphology or target their motility, then just an IVOS, motility, computer-assisted motility assessment. If we can see it on that, then we're going to be able to move forward relatively easily.
Confidence is a huge
it's
benefit. I mean, that would be
it's essential.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what is essential in this conversation, I think, is just knowing that we do have this blockade. I just triggered myself.
That's good. You have good reflexes. I think that's also beneficial, so where we sit, we're also from the advocacy angle again, a lot of what we hear, and we're trying to dispel this myth of men won't use it and women won't trust them. But what you just described, absolutely, right.
Yeah.
So the woman can see it and say, okay, all right, you did take it, or you're on your contraception, you've been taking it the way you're supposed to.
Yeah. And hopefully that's not in a healthy relationship. That conversation is not in a healthy
That's
relationship.
right. And that's the other thing that it's not necessarily, it's about trust. And if you don't trust your partner, then both people can contracept, all the better. But in a trusting relationship, hopefully it's not an issue.